Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Hope you all enjoyed that daily creative challenge. That was day number 9, and now I am back with the XD Masterclass. I saw Abdullah in there asking if this is going to be longer than half an hour. Today will not be, but hopefully next week will be longer. We'll probably do an hour next week because of the scheduling right now and my unexpected canceled flight, which I have to call the airline very soon. I'm supposed to get on a flight in like 2 hours, but I guess not. So today will be about half an hour, but we're going to be diving into states a little bit more. So last week on the masterclass, we did cover what states are, how to create them, and how to get a little bit in depth with those. But today we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of examples provided by my States UI kit. If you haven't downloaded this yet, definitely hop over to, let's go to letsxd.com/states, and Tim will post the Howard teleported. Yes, I have. Marissa, I am not having good luck with planes, and this is the, I think, second or third flight of this particular airline that has canceled my flight at the last minute, and I'm not going to like an obscure location, so I don't know what's going on. But anyways, I'm not gonna let that bother me. We're gonna get some States goodness going on. Head over to letsxd.com/states. You can watch a video about states if you want to. You can also download the UI kit right here. And what I would love for all of you to do throughout this process, whether it's today or for next week's class, is to kind of dive in here and start picking around at all the different things you can do with states and components, and then let me know what in particular you'd like to learn, because there's so much you can do with states and hover and auto animate. We're gonna take a look at a few examples today. And next week, maybe we'll build something from scratch next week. Definitely let me know. Marissa says, is it United? I'm not gonna say, because I don't wanna bash on this airline, because usually I have pretty good experience, but it is what it is, right? I'm sure there's another flight at some point. But we'll figure something out. I'll keep you all updated on Twitter. So let's hop over to Adobe XD. Let me close this thing. Actually, here's Dribbble. If you're not following on Dribbble, do that. And here's a few examples of what you can do with component states. So here I recreated the Behance experience. And the internet's being the internet. And it's not loading. Of course, nothing is working today. This is fun. My flight was canceled. This doesn't work. Anyways, here we go. In the States UI kit, there's a lot of different sections, right? We have basic states over here, which we've covered last week, making buttons, that sort of thing. We did a few hover states, but I want to start really getting into some animated stuff and talk about how you can create full interactions on a single artboard, very similar to what you did in the daily challenge that we just finished. We've got some crazy, interesting ideas down here with workarounds, things that should not be possible, but let me show you the animated states section. So we've got this, right? We've got some hearts, you can click on that, and we've got this lovely little liquid, and you can kind of see some themes that we've covered over the daily creative challenge over the last 2 weeks with animated liquid. We've got some masks, we've got auto animate. So everything kind of, comes into play, and the heart kind of explodes, right? We've got this lovely X that turns into a menu. We've got a lock and unlock icon. We've got animated masks, which we've touched on as well. And this one here in particular kind of combines hover, right, with a tap trigger to do something like that. So definitely let me know what you're interested in learning, but we're gonna hop over here to this section. And I wanna show you how really deep you can get with component states. So over here we have basically this chart, and we're gonna create something very similar to this. So I'm going to, let me just move this out of the way. And I'm gonna create a new artboard right over here. We'll just create, I don't know. You know what, let's just duplicate this artboard over, just so we can keep some of these elements. And we're gonna ungroup we're just gonna delete this, right? We're gonna create a lovely chart. So, here we go. Jan Eric says, I have to admit, it's hard being sad on a Friday. Indeed. Yeah, Jack saying, the first time I opened the States kit, I just ran the prototype and clicked on all the things. And that's the best way to learn. Click on all things, learn how things work, and then just dive into them and kind of pick things apart. So what we're gonna do here is we're going to start by creating this chart. So I'm gonna grab my line tool and just draw one out. And you've probably seen me create a chart before, but usually the way it's done is we have various artboards for the various essentially states or today, week, month, that sort of thing. But with components and states now, you can all do it on one artboard. I'm gonna make it a little bit thicker, just like that. change this to white, and I'll just round out the caps a little bit. That looks pretty good. Now I may want a few different points on this chart, and to do that, you can double click on the line. Let me zoom in here, and you can click and click, click and click, just to define the different points. And if you want to make sure that everything's looking pretty good, you can create grids on the artboard level, or you can create your own grid with line tool and repeat grids. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. So at this point, you can move things around like this, but that's a pretty sharp corner. So what you might want to do is just double click on it, on all these little points, and now you'll be able to move these around, and it's a nice wavy line, right? Just like that, move that. Let's move this down a little bit, and now we have a nice looking chart with wavy lines, right? But of course, we might want some additional information. And of course, we need a way to transition from one state of this chart to another. Now, the first thing I want to add is some sort of an indicator on where someone's, they might tap, or a specific day, they might want to show some more information. Very similar to this little guy over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in here. We're going to grab the ellipse tool, hold down Shift, draw one out like this, pop it on, let's say this point over here, right? I may want to set the border to white and set the fill to this background color, just so it kind of blends in a little bit. And of course, I might want to make the border a little bit thicker. Beautiful. Now, above this, we may want some contextual information on how much we may have spent in that particular day or week or whatever it might be. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, draw one out like this. That looks pretty good. I may want some sort of an arrow pointing down. So to do that, just grab the polygon tool, shortcut key Y, because P was taken by the pen tool. And just rotate it either way. You can rotate this way, or you can rotate it this way. I'm holding down the Shift key on my keyboard to make sure that it snaps as I'm rotating it. Make sure it's centered. I can also, inside of right inside of that bounding box, there's this little tiny handle. You can also get to it over here to the right in the properties inspector. Is just pull these in just a little bit to round out the corners of this shape. Now, of course, this in particular isn't looking very good. We need to combine these two shapes together. So I have the polygon selected. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, click on the shape in the background, which, you know what, I may want to also round out just a little bit, just like that. That looks pretty good. So I've got both of these two shapes selected, and over here to the right, we've got our Boolean option. So the first one adds those two shapes together. The second one subtracts, and so on and so forth. You've probably seen these tools in other, Illustrator has them, Photoshop has them. We want to click on the first one, which adds them together. Boop, there we go. And now we can go ahead and style this thing if we wanted to. We can change the fill. Maybe we'll sample the color in the background, make it a little bit lighter, just like that. That looks pretty good. And I'll pop it right about there. And it does line up really nicely with that shape. And now we can dive in, and let's say we spent $120 that particular day. We can change this to this color here. Maybe just go back to Poppins. Why not? Poppins is a great font. I'm into it. Make it a little bit smaller. And now we have our little tag, right? Looking pretty good. Perfect. So we've got our tag, which we could probably go ahead and group just like that. Just call that tag. We've got our chart, which I'm going to name chart. Imagine that. And I can probably put this little ellipse inside of the tag because it does belong together. Great. So the next thing we want to do is create the actual switch at the bottom. And it's basically this little guy here to show today, week, and month. And this will allow us to create basically a 3-sequence component with some states. So I'm gonna grab my rectangle. A lot of rectangles involved in designing. Make sure I'm outside of that group. Draw one out across here. There we go, beautiful. I'm gonna round out the corners completely. I'm gonna change the fill to like a dark gray, somewhere right about there. Probably don't need a border because there is a lot of contrast between that black pill shape and the yellow background. And now with that done, we need to start adding some text layers. So over here to the left, I'm going to type out, let's say today, change the color to white so it pops out. Make it a little bit smaller, not too small. We definitely want it to be visible. Maybe in the center. Where's the center? There's the center right there. This will be week. Make sure this is centered. Beautiful. And then over here, we're gonna have month. Wow, month. Perfect. All right. So we've got these going on, but of course we need some sort of an indicator to let us know which chart we're looking at. So very similar to this, what we're gonna do is we're going to select the background pill, duplicate it. I'm gonna change the color to, a nice yellow color. And then make this, I'm also gonna pull it in from the top and bottom. I can do that by holding down my Alt or Option key and just pulling in just a little bit, just like that, so we have a little bit of breathing room. And then pull this guy in just like that. I can make sure that everything's centered if I wanted to. Everything looks good. I can move this over to see how that looks. That's looking pretty good. Perfect. All right. So we now have the shapes complete. And Richard's asking, how did you create the curve slope? Because I want to apply this for a wellness app. So what I did very quickly, I just grabbed a line, drew a line out across. Let me change this to white, right? Make it nice and thick. It's a little bit too thick. There we go. And with that line, you just can double click on it to add a few points. And once you've added points, by default, they're very sharp. But if you double click on those points, you can have a nice curve. So you can double click on all the points like that, move them around, and everything looks pretty fancy. So hopefully that helps. All right, so we've got basically our chart complete. We've got all the elements that we possibly need. So what we need to do now is take all these elements that we want included inside of this component and turn it into a component. So I'm gonna, in my layers panel, I'm gonna make sure to select all these layers. So we've got the tag, we've got the chart. So basically from here, the chart all the way up to month. And we need to group all of these together into a single component. So with all those selected, I'm gonna hit that component button over to the right, boop, just like that. We've got our default state. And now we can start building out the states for week and today as well. So I'm gonna press the plus button, create a new state, and this will be for week. And now with that selected, I'm gonna dive in and start making changes. So I'm gonna move this over to week so it lines up really nicely, just like that. I can double click on the line and start making changes. Move that up a little bit, move this, move that down. We'll move that down and then we'll move this up a little bit. Grab the tag, move that. I can also change the text. Let's say this will be, I don't know, $89, right? Make sure it's centered. And there we go. Now I can press escape to go back to the parent level of the group and then the component and that sort of thing. And now I can create one more state for today. Grab my little pill indicator, drag that over. That looks pretty good there. And then dive in. Just like that. Design is a lot of repetitive work, but it all makes sense and it's all it's all worth it in the end. And maybe today we spend $12. Perfect. Now let me shift that just a little bit. All right, so we've got week, we've got our default state, and we've got everything looking pretty fancy. But of course, we might want to animate this thing now. So, and that's the beauty of component states, is that you can animate between various states. And to do that, we're gonna switch over to prototype mode. And what we want is essentially when someone taps on the week text layer, we're gonna click on that so that we get our little prototype wire. And over to the right, we do wanna tap trigger, and we want to choose auto animate. So XD looks at the differences between the two states and animates it. We're going to choose week. We can do, let's say, we'll do in and out and then 0.4 seconds. We'll see how that looks. Then we can go to today, and we're going to go to today, just like that. And let's see what happens. We're gonna press play, and bam, there we go. Maybe it's a little bit too fast, so what we can do is we can actually select both of these by holding down the shift key and clicking on the various layers, and then 0.6 seconds. That looks pretty good. So now that that initial interaction is set up and we're pretty happy with it, what we can start to do is we can start going to the other various states. So we can go to week, and then we can say if someone taps on month, they'll basically go to the default state. If someone taps on today, they'll go to today. Then we can back up to the parent. Today, if someone taps on week, they go to week, and then month, they go to the default state. So all of a sudden now, we can basically cycle between all the different states within our chart on a single artboard just by tapping like this, right? And that looks pretty good. Fancy. All right, so that's basically how to build out a chart similar to that. Today, earlier, we did show off how to create a pop-out card. So if you did miss that, if you want to watch how that's done, definitely watch the Daily Creative Challenge number 9 that just wrapped up. But I want to also show you how you can use overlays. You can use component states within overlays, which I think is really cool. So in this case, we have this essentially, let me go back to our default state here. We have this menu over here. And the big benefit of using overlays within Adobe XD is that you don't have to build out separate menus for every single artboard. Of course, you could do this with component states now, but you can also have a menu as a single artboard and then use it from multiple artboards as well, which is really nice. So I'm going to actually go ahead and I'm going to delete all of this. Delete. Delete. Well, I can keep that one. I'm going to ungroup this repeat grid, just like that, because I want to show you how you can kind of build this out. And again, this is on a separate artboard, but it's going to be used as an overlay with components that actually work. Rising Fire, may we ask questions? Absolutely. I will try my best to answer. So in this case, we've got this component, but I do want to ungroup this component, just like that, so I can show you how this is done from scratch. So this is essentially a toggle switch. Nothing too crazy, but you can create an off state and an on state. So I'm gonna go to, I have my group selected, right? I'm gonna make sure to select the toggle and this little guy over here. We're gonna turn this into a component. And now we can start building out the various states. So this is the on state, and now we want an off state. So I'm gonna create a new state. I'm gonna call that off. Drag this little guy over to the left. Change this to, let's say, a gray. And now we have an off state. Nothing too crazy. We've got on, we've got off. And just like we did in the last example, we can prototype this. So in prototype mode, we're gonna click, and we're going to go to auto animate, off, and then we're gonna click, auto animate, and default, right? So we've got on, we've got off. It's a little bit too slow, so we can just bump that up, right? Now, the benefit of doing this is that once you have a component created and prototyped, what you're able to do is you're able to include that inside of a repeat grid. So if I select the component here that I just created, and I select the download over cellular or whatever text layer this is, I do have a group, but you don't need a group, so I'm gonna ungroup it. You can have a group, you can not have a group, it's up to you. But I've got both of them selected, and I'm gonna turn this into a repeat grid just like that. And now I can just pull this down and have a few additional options, right? Adjust the padding a little bit. And Rising Fire is saying, small question, project presentation, I should make a story on creation, but is there any design tips for making a presentation? That's a big question. I think I have a video on creating presentations within Adobe XD. Maybe I'll cover that next week on the Masterclass, but it's a pretty loaded question for a short stream. So I'll try to get to that next week if that's okay. So we've got this repeat grid, and let's just start naming some of these things. Explicit content, right? And let's say listen over cellular. And what's something else that we might need in a music type application? What else do we need? Allow friends to follow. Something like that, right? Perfect. So we've got basically this repeat grid. We've got a bunch of components with toggle switches inside of this menu on a separate artboard. And like I mentioned, let me actually go ahead and delete this wire. We can use this specific overlay and menu on many different artboards. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over to this screen over here. I'm going to select this little guy at the top. This could be a menu icon, this could be a profile icon, whatever it might be. And you're gonna drag this over to this specific artboard that contains your menu. Now within your properties, you do want a tap trigger because you want someone to tap on it. Of course, you could use keys and gamepad if you want to. You can activate it with voice. But instead of auto animate, you actually want to choose an overlay, and that'll take whatever is inside of this artboard here and overlay it on top of this artboard, which is nice. And if it wasn't the same size, you can move it around, but it is the exact same size, so it does show up there. You can also choose how you want the animation to kick off. So you want to slide to the left, slide to the right, that sort of thing. Let's go ahead and slide to the right. We'll do ease in and out and 0.4 seconds. So now if I'm on this artboard and I tap on my face at the top, that menu slides out. But unlike before, what you're able to do now is you're actually able to interact with the various components and their states on this overlay, which is super cool, right? And you can click away to close it, you can click back, and it opens up again, which is nice. Mohammed saying components and repeat grid does work very well, especially when working with data. It does. And what's really cool is that when you're using components within a repeat grid, you're able to override. So in this particular case, I probably have another example somewhere, but in this particular case, in the past, if I was not using components and states within this repeat grid, if I were to make changes to any one of these toggles, it would basically push those changes to every single toggle in this repeat grid. But now, because I have state selected, I can just make changes and it's not pushing those changes, which is really nice. Thomas is saying, if you want to increase the graphics quality of your on-off switch, can you export that specific component into Photoshop? You could. I mean, you could definitely use Illustrator or Photoshop to create your elements and then bring them in. You can either open a Photoshop file directly or you can import it. If you're in Illustrator, you can actually copy and paste. You can also save elements to your Creative Cloud library. That way they kind of remain in sync. But you can also do a lot. I mean, I would love to hear what kind of quality you're looking for your on-off switches, because there's a lot you can do in Adobe XD. Specifically when it comes to animation and things like that. You know, for example, here's material states that I created. And it has like the little thing that explodes, right? You've got play buttons over here and toggle switches. Nothing too crazy, but there's a lot you can do, right? So let me take one last quick look and just kind of show you an example before I run off and figure out why my flight was canceled. This is a pretty good example of how powerful component states are, right? You've got this music application. Some of you may have seen this, but you've got this music application and there's a lot of interactions on this thing. You've got some toggle switches, you've got a bunch of hover effects, and this at the bottom, I believe, is a component with various states, right? You can switch some songs. And in the past, before component states were available, you essentially needed many, many different artboards in order to have a user interact with this. And they would probably have to interact with it in a very particular order to get through the entire thing. And Anna's asking, where do I get this UI kit? If you go to letsxd.com/states, you can download this kit. But now with component states, you can notice there's hover effects going on. There's this search interaction at the top. We have a notification center up here, more hover effects, right? We can turn on and off hearts. We can switch songs at the bottom. And all of this is being done on one single artboard. So you no longer need, 16, 20, 100 artboards. One of our product managers did something very similar to this, but he went super crazy. And he had like over 100 artboards for basically the interactions on a music app. But now with component states, you just need one, which is great. So I'm gonna wrap things up. I'm gonna go figure out what happened with my flight. I'm definitely thrown off. I apologize today. But thanks for joining me, everyone. Next week, I'm gonna be back with a 1-hour XD Masterclass now that the daily challenges are over. So definitely make sure to let me know either in the chat or on Twitter or somewhere what you'd like to see me covered. I wanna get really in depth with these Masterclasses going forward. Hopefully I make it home today. But thanks again for watching, everyone. Anna and Tim and Garafi, Richard and Thomas and Mohammed and Rising Fire and everyone else for joining me. I will see you all. And Jack, welcome, goodbye, and I'll see you next time.